My name's Roy, aka Cross Me Off. That's the name I record under. And this is a tutorial and demo video of the new Reason Studios pattern mutator player for Reason. And it's a great plugin, and it allows you to, as the name would suggest, it allows you to mutate a pattern. So if you're struggling to come up with ideas, or you just want to switch things around without editing a sequence yourself, then you can allow this to do some of the lifting for you. So basically, when you create, in fact, let's delete that. And so I've got a subtractor here, and I have actually got a sequence that I've recorded, but for now, I'm just going to mute that sequence. And so I've got a subtractor, so I'm going to go into the browser, into the players, and I'm going to create a pattern mutator. And you just drag it onto the top, so you see the plus icon, and it will automatically route like all player devices do. But with players, you don't get the cabling. So if you tab and look around the back, there's no cabling saying that it's connected, but it is connected. The connection is invisible. That is just the audio coming out of the subtractor into the mix channel. So when you create a pattern mutator, there are presets, but it will create an initialized patch, or certainly that's how you've got your preferences set in Reason. So with the init patch selected, there are no patterns. All the patterns are empty. If there was a pattern in there, you would see you'd see some markings basically. So there's two ways to get stuff notes into the mutator. So you've got step record. So you hit step and then just play some notes on your keyboard. So you can put notes in like that, and you can play the sequence. That's the sequence, like I said, not very good. So you can clear the pattern, and that's also now put a pattern in slot 1. If you go to pattern 2, you'll see that it's empty. So you always know that there's a pattern in there because it's filled basically. There's nothing in those ones. Also, if you go to the copy mutation to pattern, and we haven't done a mutation yet, but if you go to this drop down menu, pattern 1 has got a dot next to it. So any pattern with a dot next to it, without even looking up here or switching, you can see whether it's got a pattern next to it or not. So let's just clear that pattern. So the other way of getting stuff in is to play stuff in real time. So you would select record, press run, and play some stuff in. Now there's another way of using it, and that is to use an existing sequence, which as far as the player is concerned, it won't tell the difference between you playing something in via your keyboard or a sequence that exists already in the sequencer. So I'm going to unmute this sequence. I'm going to just bypass pattern mutator for now. So this is a sequence that I've got in the sequencer. So just a 2-bar pattern. So if there's 16 steps in 1 bar, there'll be 32 steps in that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the step length. Now when you're in step record, it will just advance until you stop record. I don't know what the maximum length is. But with a recorded sequence, you can say how many steps you want it to be. So I'm going to say 32 steps, because that's what that sequence is. I'm going to put it into record mode. I've reset the device, and I'm going to put it into record. Now all I need to do now is press play in the sequencer, and I will get a 32 bar. That sequence will be recorded into the mutator. I let it loop round, it doesn't matter. There's 32 steps now, so if I mute the sequencer track, and in fact I'm going to set the locators over here, I can even, in fact, I'll delete that sequence. There we go, that's deleted now. So if I come out of record, you must come out of record to playback. Turns out you don't have to, my mistake. But I would advise that you do come out of record, so to stop you entering any more notes. So this is now the sequence that we've got. It's exactly the same as what we had before. Now, I want to keep that sequence. So obviously you could save the patch if you wanted to save it quickly and call it, you know, MUT1 or whatever you want to call it. Just to stop you making any mistakes. So I want to keep that pattern in slot 1, but I want to do a mutation. So this is where these controls come in. Now if you mutate this pattern now and you haven't touched any of these controls, nothing will happen. What will happen is you'll get the same pattern. There is a reason that you might want to do this, and that is if you want to change the gate length and the rate, but change nothing else. So if none of these switches are changed, none of these dials are changed, you'll get the same pattern. So if you hit play now, the mutated version is playing, but it's not mutated. So if you want to change the gate lengths of a pattern, but that's all you want to change, is copy that to another slot. So now slots 1 and 2 contain the same pattern, but if I select pattern 2 and change the gate length and hit play, and go back to pattern 1, it's the same pattern. The only thing that's changed is the gate length. So that is why the copy mutation without changing any of these is a good idea, because you can then copy it to another slot. So let's say I want to do the same thing again. So I could say, in fact, I can go to pattern 3. Once you've got it in there once, that's it. So pattern 3, you can basically copy it as many times as you want and change the gate length or change the steps, the rate. So now, so we've got 3 variations of the pattern, but we haven't changed any pitches, we haven't swapped any notes, we haven't changed the density, how busy the pattern is, we haven't changed the note lengths apart from the gate length, and we haven't changed the velocity. So we've already got 3 different patterns before we've even actually done a proper mutation. So let's now go back to our original pattern. So now we're going to start messing around with some of these. So we're going to, this will change the pitch of the notes. The higher the setting on any of these dials, the more extreme the setting. So I think the first few notches or percentage or whatever, because you get a percentage, this will be small incremental changes. So this will be like semitone changes and then tones. Then I think it goes up to fifths. And then finally you start getting octave jumps the more into the blue section you go. So the more extreme it is, or the further around the dial is, the more extreme the mutations will be. So for the first one, we'll just change some of the notes and we'll leave everything else as it is and we'll hit mutate. So now we've got this, as opposed to this. So that is the original pattern, and you can always swap between the two. So I don't particularly like this mutation, so I'm going to bring the octave switch down a little bit, but I'm also going to move up the swap. So this is swapping notes around. I'm going to change the pattern density. I'm going to change the note lengths, and I'm going to change the velocity as well. Let's hit mutate and press play. Try it again. Now if I decide that I liked that last mutation before I press mutate again, you can do Command Z on a Mac. I would assume Control Z on a PC would work, and you can undo. So you can go back to the last mutation. So let's say I want to save this mutation now. Now remember, to start with, we already created a couple of variations in patterns 2 and patterns 3 where we just changed the gate length and the rate. So now if I want to overwrite them, I would select one of those, but I don't. I want to select an empty slot. So slots 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 haven't got a dot next to them. Those patterns 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 are all empty. So I can just say copy it to pattern 4. And instantly, now in pattern 4, we've got the mutation. So now we can just hit play on the sequence. And we can go through the mutations. So say pattern 1 is the original. Patterns 2 and 3, we just changed the gate length, I think in pattern 2. Pattern 3, we changed the gate length and the rate. Pattern 4 was the first mutation. Now I can mutate this pattern, obviously, or I can go back to the original one and keep mutating the original. So let's try and mutate this one and see what we get. I'm going to switch that down. In fact, I want to go back to the original pattern and mutate this one. So let's go back here. We've got the original one. Make sure you click the pattern so you hear this rather than the mutation. You can always switch between the two. So let's mutate the original again. Try it again. Let's go back to the original. So the more, the higher the density, the more notes will be created, and the smaller the density, you should get fewer notes. Yeah, it's not changing how many notes, I think. It's how busy the pattern is. But if you go back to the original pattern again, you can vary it by, so let's say, let's copy that. So we just make all of those 0 and then do mutate, and then I'm going to copy it to pattern 5. So I've now got the original pattern in 1 and also in 5. But on this one, I want to change the number of steps. Let's see what this sounds like. Let's go to the copy and make it 20. And let's put some drums with it. So you can switch the patterns as it's playing back. You should also be able to automate those. If you do on a Mac, it is Option, which is also the Alt key. So I'd imagine on a PC you have the Alt key, but it's Alt or Option on the Mac. You create in the sequencer, you'll create a automation lane, and it's create one here for pattern select. So if you just use the right tool, which is W for the pen, and you can just literally then go in, if you use the razor tool and cut wherever you want, you can put in different patterns, so you can automate it, and you should be able to even change those midway through. So let's put quantize onto, say, quarter, and let's see, this should switch it. Go back again. Yeah, you can switch. So you can really do, you can switch on half a bar, a quarter of a bar. You can switch wherever you want to switch, and just use the razor tool, set your quantize to wherever you want to start cutting, and you can literally do pattern changes. You can automate stuff like that. So here we go. So another feature of the Mutator is that you can transpose the pattern that's playing back using a MIDI keyboard. So I've got a pattern in the Mutator, and this is what it sounds like. So when that's playing back, if you press a key on your keyboard, you will transpose the pattern, so it will sound like this. Now I know you can't see the keys that I'm playing on the MIDI keyboard, but the transposition was taking place because of the keys that I was pressing. Now the sequencer has got 3 modes. It's got sequencer, sequencer and key. Now with the main sequencer stopped, if I press a note on the keyboard, it's just sounding the subtractor as if the player wasn't there. And if I switch it to sequencer and key, the same thing. With the sequencer stopped, you're just getting the sound of the subtractor. The only way this will play in a stop mode from the keyboard is if you select key and then you press a key on your keyboard, it will start the sequencer running. So that's a good way of programming patterns with the main sequencer stopped. So you don't want to have to mute all your other tracks, or you just don't want the sequencer playing. So if you want to play a pattern from a keyboard so you can do your transposition, then you use that mode. With the main sequencer running, we go back. So with sequencer selected, which is the default option, the pattern starts playing. As long as the sequencer is playing, the pattern will play. If you've got it set to sequencer and key, no sound will be made until you press a key on the keyboard. So if I hit play on the main sequencer, so you'll hear the drum beat play, but the subtractor will be silent until you press a key on your keyboard. And the key is to watch what's happening here. You'll see the pattern starts here. So, and it will carry on looping around, but it will only sound when you play a key on your keyboard. So that's good for creating some variation. And the final option is key. This will do the same thing. It will only play the sequence if you hold a key on your keyboard, but the difference is it will re-trigger the sequence every time. So if you look at the arrow that's circling around, key held, key off, key held, key off. You go back to the other mode. So in sequencer and key mode, the sequencer is running all the time with the main sequencer playing, with Reason playing, but a sound will only be made when you hold the key down, and wherever you hold the key, wherever the sequence is, that's where it will start playing. But with the other option, it will start at the start of the sequence, and every time you release a key, as long as you release it and there's a slight gap between pressing the next key, then it will keep resetting the sequence. But if you do smooth key changes, then it will carry on playing continuously. Smooth key changes. Take the finger off the key. So as soon as you release the key, if you haven't got the next note playing, then it will reset the sequence. So it's a way of making a variation on how the sequencer plays back. So that's the three main modes of the sequencer. So another thing that you can do is you can switch between the mutation and the pattern just by clicking the circles. So literally like that. So whichever one is like a solid colour. So green for the pattern, orange for the mutation. So with it playing back, you can just switch. So it's a good way of just switching between the patterns. Obviously, you can only switch between the pattern and one mutation. To do proper pattern switching, you need to go to the pattern select buttons and use those. But it's a quick way of just changing between the two. And obviously, you've got your shuffle setting here. And the shuffle setting, in fact, all of these settings here only affect the pattern before it's mutated. If you set the shuffle setting here and the rate, and then mutate the pattern, though that rate and shuffle setting will be mutated, or they'll be part of the mutated pattern. So you can't add shuffle when you're in the mutated pattern. Changing the shuffle setting here won't make any difference. So you have to change the shuffle before you mutate the pattern. Of course, you can mutate the pattern and then copy it to one of the slots and then you basically, obviously, when you select a pattern, making sure that this is selected, when you select a pattern here, you can of course add shuffle to that pattern. So shuffle only affects the area in green, the pattern that's actually playing on the left. Once a pattern is in the mutation slot, you can't add shuffle or change the rate or anything. You have to then copy that to a slot and then select it in here, and you can do that. So that's worth bearing in mind before you start messing around with shuffle settings, is that you need to do it on the area in green, or mutate, then copy it to a slot and then select that slot for playback. And again, changing these won't make any difference. They will load into there. The area is now greyed, but the pattern that you will hear playing back is the mutated pattern, because that's in orange. You have to click that to then give that focus, and you can't, or at least I haven't found a way to automate this switching. Earlier in the video I showed you how to switch the patterns, but there doesn't seem to be a way of automating between the pattern slot, the main pattern slot, and the mutated pattern slot. That would be kind of nice if they could do that, but I suppose the way that you can do that is to have both those patterns in the slots, and then you can automate the changes like that. And it's the same for the step setting. The length setting. Once a pattern is in the orange area, you can't change the step length. Changing the step length actually changes what's in the pattern area. So again, if you want to change a step length, if you change it over here and then mutate the pattern, and then you can mess around with it over here. But again, you can't now changing the step length here. The number of steps will not affect what's in the orange area. So just bear in mind that all these settings here, the rate, the shuffle, the step and the length, only affect patterns once they're in the actual main pattern slot. They don't affect patterns that have been mutated until those patterns have been copied to a slot, and then when you select that slot, they're loaded into this area, and then you can change the settings. So thanks for watching. Hope it's of some use to you. I would definitely say download this player. You have 30-day trial, fully working, and it is a great plugin, especially to throw on existing material. If you're stuck for ideas, it's a great way just to come up with new patterns and, basically, as the name says, to mutate them. So thanks for watching, and there will be more Reason tutorial videos in the future.